There's this delightful Jungian saying, keep your shadows in front of you. They can only take you down from behind. So today we're going to talk about the shadows that our culture casts. Each of us grew up in a particular culture, and that culture predisposes us to certain blind spots. If we are not aware of them, they affect our decisions and our ability to do good in the world. So every culture has core values. Members of that culture are rarely vividly aware of those core values, not in any kind of real way, but they hold them to be self-evident, givens that cannot be assailed or challenged. If you try, they'll misunderstand you. If you try again, they'll laugh at you, and if you try hard enough, they could be provoked to do violence against you. People get very upset when their cultural core values are challenged. The tricky thing is that we do our thinking from our core values. They are our base assumptions, and so they are almost never examined unless someone brings them into the light. If we don't become explicitly aware of our core values, they can get us into trouble. These central ideas, these most important concepts in every culture, they're part of why the culture works. They are also part of what doesn't work in the culture. They have a dark side, and that shadow can take us down if we're not aware of it. So, for example, many cultures fall into a category called honor-shame. They're more concerned about not losing face or saving face, keeping honor, than they are about specific culpabilities. So how the community appears, how the community is seen from the outside, and especially how the leader appears, is extremely important in those cultures, because that appearance of power and competency is what has kept the people safe. It has worked for them until it doesn't. The Chinese government covering up the actual origin of the coronavirus, or the early case numbers, or how bad it really was, those decisions could have come from an unexamined honor-shame matrix. And look at the ripples from that lack of self-awareness. Now here in Spain, we have kind of a paz y tranquilidad sort of culture, a peace and tranquility. This is one of the first really warm days of the season, and you might be able to hear my neighbors, each in their yards, making as much noise as they can, just trying to enjoy the paz y tranquilidad, the peace and tranquility. There's kind of a mañana, mañana, and people do this with their hand. Tomorrow, 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 tomorrow. That tomorrow, tomorrow approach very likely governed the pace at which the Spanish government responded to very real coronavirus cases and very real community spread. It was a little too slow, a little too tomorrow, tomorrow, until suddenly it wasn't. So when the boss came on TV and said, we are in a state of alarm and we are locking everything down, all the people said, that's a great idea, yes sir. Even all these kind of party-going, easygoing, laid-back beach people all went to their homes because of two values that operate really strongly in the Spanish culture: power distance and community value. Everybody wanted to make sure that they were doing right by their neighbor, and that was more important to them than their own personal sense of individual rights. Now, though I live in Spain and have lived in Central Asia, I am an American, and I will always be an American. There's nothing I can do about that, and there's not really anything I want to do about that. As an American, down in my basement, here in my center room of my chest, I believe that I am basically free, and that I have an inalienable right, and kind of even a responsibility, to stay alive, to not be told what to do, and to make money. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In the case of these assumptions, these core values, we made them explicit in our core cultural document. But what we did not make explicit is that we operate from those inalienable truths as though they are universal assumptions for all human life. And there are many holy people in many other countries who love Jesus deeply and have been shaped deeply by him, who do not hold those truths to be self-evident and find them occasionally reckless. A second core value in the American mindset that was brought to my attention by a man who worked in many countries in Africa, he's a cultural anthropologist. He said that because the United States became a country long after the Enlightenment, we have a very naturalistic mindset, a naturalistic worldview. We believe basically that the universe is a machine, and that if you get the keys right and pull the levers just right, things will work out right. Now, there is a lot to leadership, and leadership is very important and influences a lot of things. But some things cannot be controlled by the set of right decisions. Sometimes the universe is not a machine. It's a reckless, raging fury. Sometimes it is a natural catastrophe. Sometimes things happen, and there is no way to split the middle between the rock and the hard place. We can rail against leaders all we want, but sometimes we're doing that because we believe the universe is a machine, and if they would just work the machine right, things would work out for us. And it's okay that that pattern of thinking is inside our minds. It's okay that we were shaped by the cultures that we came from. Culture is good and beautiful. And like many good and beautiful things, it has a dark side. If you haven't lived for years outside of your home culture, and if you haven't intentionally acculturated to another place, and even if you have, you can't do much directly to change these values. And you don't need to, but we need to be conscious of them. Awareness goes a long way. I recently heard Brene Brown tell Tim Ferriss, emotions and cognition, undefined and unexplored, drive every decision that you make. There are probably a lot of decisions that you've made in the last few weeks that came from cultural assumptions, and you might have thought they were coming from data. You might have thought you were approaching these things in an unbiased way, but probably you weren't. When we are aware and reflective and humble enough to let our core values be challenged, we put ourselves in much better stead to be able to make wise decisions and take good and beautiful actions. So, watch that cultural blind spot, mind your shadows.